Good evening, this is Viewpoint. Tonight we're not opening with politics as usual. We're opening with grief, with fire, with blood in the sand of Zamfara. At least 50 people killed. Women and children abducted. Entire families erased between 5 p.m. and 3:30 a.m. in Tungan Dutse and Dutsin Hajiya villages in Anka local government area of Zamfara State. Residents say they saw them coming, more than 150 motorcycles carrying armed men. They alerted authorities, they called for help, help never came. By morning, homes were ashes, bodies were scattered, and Nigeria was once again counting its dead. According to Amnesty International, more bodies are still being discovered, more families are still searching, more victims are fighting for their lives at Anka General Hospital. Yet, the federal government insists it is winning the war against banditry. If this is victory, what does defeat look like? Tonight on Viewpoint, we ask the hard question. How does a convoy of 150 armed men move undetected for hours? Why do repeated warnings from villages go unanswered? Why has Zamfara been bleeding since 2012 with no permanent solution in sight? And most importantly, how many more graves must be dug before accountability begins? This is not just another security headline, this is a test of governance. I'm Olaitan Babatunde, and today with me in the studio is our political internet analyst, Odiawa Hehai. How are you doing today, Odiawa?
Perfectly fine as always.
Today we're talking about something sad, and it looks like what happened in Woro, a village the other time. But then before we move on, let's go on a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. The show is still Viewpoint. Okay, so before we went on a short break, I said this looks like what happened in Woro earlier this month, and at least for Woro, we heard that we thought that maybe they couldn't ask for help, but this one they asked for help. They called in, and then from 5 p.m. in the evening till 3:30 a.m. in the morning, help didn't come to them, and that says a lot about what is going on in the country. He says a lot about how much insecurity seems to have become our lifestyle. It has become an habit. It's more like we're getting used to it. And like I said when we talked about Wura attack, like many Nigerians feel like, oh, it's none of our business because it is not close to home. But we're forgetting that this thing keeps coming closer every time. So what underlying factors have allowed repeated large-scale attacks to persist in Zamfara State despite years of military operations and government assurance? And like, when I was saying in the intro, this has been happening since 2012 and nothing has been done. I'd say that this has been happening for over 10 years. I think about 14 years now. These people have been living in fear and help hasn't gotten to them ever since that time up to this moment, and they still have to go through this over and over again. So what do you think can be going on in all of this?
As you said, it's been going on for almost 10 years. So most of the incidents which have actually taken place, the root causes, first of all, we should look at infrastructure deficiencies.
Yeah.
Now, if there's no infrastructure in place to address poverty, to address education, the next available option will be to pick up arms in an environment where people are prone to violence. They wake up every time to shelling of guns and shelling of bombs and sporadic gunshots. Now, there hasn't been also strict, firm deterrence measures to make sure that people are actually dealt with. We could remember some decree that was set up during with Buhari junta with the Diabon. If you actually got caught committing a particular crime, straight to firing squad. So these are things which are being put in place. If there's no strict, stringent measures put in place, these insurgents will continue with their insurgencies and violence will continue to be rampant. Another thing we should look at is the terrain. It's a case of expect the unexpected because of the vast nature of Zamfara. It's along the border between Niger and Nigeria. So a situation whereby the military is not or may be well informed concerning the terrain in that axis. It's now for them to be able to actually go about how they can deploy whatever available resources they have, because it's a case of expect the unexpected, particularly when they struck. If we look at the case of Woro, it actually took them to execute their heinous acts all through the night. Same thing has repeated itself again. So they need intelligence reports. A situation whereby there's an intelligence deficiency there, or intelligence sharing where there's a deficit. it becomes a problem. If you are not sharing information with the locals, and also there's some level of complacency whereby even the security operatives on their own part do not take seriously, spontaneously, the reports from the locals, it becomes a problem. They might want to shove them aside and say they are talking gibberish jargons, all those kind of something. So when you don't take the citizens serious, they feel unprotected. And when they feel unprotected, they are even like a desical to even share intelligence reports. Why? Because the operations are always taking place after the attacks.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it.
All right. So let's look at this. This happened within the time frame of 10 hours. I'll say it took about 10 hours, 30 minutes in order for them to do what they did from 5 p.m. to 3 a.m. And then these people called for help, and no help came to them throughout that time, because I think for Wura attack we didn't hear anything about calling for help, and then we said that probably they were at the outskirts of the town and maybe because of that help couldn't come to them. But now we're hearing that these people called for help and yet help didn't come to them. Now what can we say this kind of situation, or people reading, the citizens of the country now reading this kind of thing, what kind of thing do you think it creates in their mind?
I would say it creates some level of fear and disrupts. It makes them begin to bank on survival rather than progress.
Yeah.
Because when you begin to instill all sorts of fear in a particular person because of all these insurgent activities, they normalize it even for generations yet unborn. That is the new normal, and that environment begins to engage or sow this seed of PTSD, post-traumatic syndrome within even the children, where they wake up and there's this societal alienation whereby everyone is a suspect. So it quite causes serious harm in the life of the people out there if measures are not taken in place by the state government or even the federal government that has a fractured system of command. Why? Because bureaucracy is actually taking place. While the seconds are counting, the minutes are counting, these armed groups are re-strategizing. And they have to be dependent on what is available based on crude measures. Most of their artillery are locally made. They can't be compared to what the Nigerian military has conventionally. So if we now begin to look at most of the refined or sophisticated insurgents, you can now say who are actually their backers, whereby they are only going after the women. If they are going after the women, and if you look at it, that particular act, women, as far as they are concerned, it's forbidden for them to engage in some kind of activities as compared to the South. So they tend to exploit all those things. Exploitation is another thing. And the children who are also vulnerable, who are yet to tell their left from their right, will easily heed to this orientation of I'm your senior, you have to listen to what I have to say. So when you factor in all those things, they begin to look for the women whereby probably they want to procreate and establish their own emirate or caliphate. All those kind of things also come into play. And they begin to exploit I would say mining resources to use to see how they can procure instruments to perpetuate their insurgencies.
Okay, so looking at this is looking as though the government are not even taking accountability of things, because if they said we are winning the banditry and yet every day there is a news about kidnap, there's a news about killing, there's a news about another village getting wiped off, what would you say the government are intentionally shying away from their responsibility, or they just want to put the mind of people at rest and say that, oh, we're winning, whereas what the news is telling us is that we're losing to this banditry, if we're to look at it, because lives are getting taken by men who we don't know. And this, I think at some point, was it last year or earlier this year, where we saw videos and where they were saying that, oh, that they are coming to, they particularly mentioned that town, like they're coming to this town, and it just shows boldness for them to come on social media and say that, oh, this is what we're going to do next. It shows a lot of boldness, and it shows like we have backing, we have protection. So would you say that the government might be shying away from their responsibility, or they are not just ready to take accountability for what is really going on?
I won't say the government is not taking accountability, because to begin with, the new chief of defense staff, actually, he's been working. At least the narrative is not as it used to be back then. But nothing is perfect. But I believe it's the power of the government to make sure that they pacify the anxiety of its citizens or of the people, because when tensions begin to rise, there might be some negative uproar which cannot be managed. So another thing is, if the government is armed with some intelligence reports, it might not want to release it out there just to increase the tensions also.
Yeah.
So what I feel that going on in the long term, the government should go beyond, will I say, or rather, I would say, not just delivering punishments alone, they should also deliver repairs. Because these people, once they are displaced from their own traditional homes, which they have been in or settled in for years, it begins to overwhelm public spaces of other areas with their displacements, and it's overwhelming for public services. And before you say Jack, there begins to be competition of resources, which will now become scarce in the long run. So these are things that you begin to look at. Also, the security agencies, not necessarily the military here, not necessarily Zamfara State, not necessarily the affected village here in Zamfara State, could be anywhere.
Yeah.
They should be able to set up camps in porous areas where it is quite far from the capital before information could get to, or maybe deployments can get to even the affected areas, or maybe intel, which has been reported, is to be acted upon. So there should be an established base or an established camp to instill that, okay, yes, this is a state, our presence here is making a statement. It shouldn't be an episodic affair whereby it's only when there's an attack, that's when you see them coming hours later. Why? Because probably in the night they couldn't come. Why? Because it's a case of maybe the headlamps are bad, they can need to see, or the terrain is bad and they get stuck in some prone erosion area because they are not conversant with the terrain. And if they're not conversant with the terrain, an unexpected ambush is made on the soldiers, and then we begin to hear another report making the headlines that so people on their deployments down to so affected area were ambushed and they were slaughtered. We saw what happened in Rivers State. We've seen that several times. The Brigadier General who was also caught up in a crossfire and nabbed in crossfire also. So these are things the government should also weigh into. And then they should also set up, to address the situation, they should also set up instruments in place that will actually defy these negative societal and economic drives that are pushing them to these insurgencies. Probably setting up one artisan activity or whatever, and trying to see how they can repair the damage which they have optically seen.
All right, thank you very much. I think earlier you were talking about the fact that Nigerians are living in fear now, and then the instinct now is just to survive. They are all trying to survive. Now, when it comes to when you're under a government, normally a citizen of the country should trust that government to take care of them and protect them. I mean, take charge of their welfareism and also look out for them and see that they are well protected. But when the citizen of the country have not become people who are looking out to survive and protect themselves, it kind of, I think the trust they have in that government dwindle with time. So in what ways can federal, state and state authorities rebuild trust with rural residents who say they feel unprotected and abandoned?
When it comes to protection, the average thoughts will be channeled towards arms and armaments and artillery, and of course security personnel evident on ground. So like I mentioned, setting up base camps for them to be actually there. But it goes beyond that. These security operatives, be them at the federal level or the state level, need to be synchronized with the local vigilante groups who are actually conversant with the terrain. So if they are conversant with the local vigilante groups within the terrain, they will know how to actually operate. In some episode which we were talking about, we mentioned the likes of Amoteko, just to mention a few people. Now, if they can mingle with these other people, there are also other mushroom vigilante groups. These are people who actually know their way around compared to the military. For instance, someone has been deployed to a particular area based on area of primary assignment. He has never been there before, but he's answering the clarion call of the government. So upon getting there, he needs to be ready for the unexpected, but cannot be well furnished unless with synchronization from local authorities who are conversant with that area. Also, the indigenes of the area also, intelligence sharing is most key, most important. If they see anything, take for instance in areas like the UK, people who are well traveled have also come back to say that once they see suspicious activities or a fellow who hasn't been living in a particular area, they always give feedbacks to the police. So the police always comes around to carry out checks. So the same thing here, it happens within local areas here, but the problem is communication. intelligence sharing. Someone who is actually seen up and down, they ask, okay, who is this fellow? When did he arrive here? What does he do?
Yeah.
So these are questions they ask. Once they are not being able to ask those questions, once they are not able to communicate, it becomes a problem. Oftentimes, even the supposed people who are suspects are being backed by high-profile influencers.
Yeah.
Now, these high-profile influencers, if the locals begin to say anything by opening their jaws, they might end up on the floor 6 feet, and mysteriously, you might not even find out how they are still coming back to fear again. So that fear syndrome has already been sewn into their psyche, not to even speak up. We were watching a film the other time, they call it The Head. So we saw what happened there. It was actually an indigent who was actually giving them intel, giving them information. So they knew how to strategize, where to move, where not to go to. So at the end of the day, we see all those things. The indigents on themselves have a role to play with the vigilantes and also the security agencies. So it's a networking thing. And also the security agencies need to partner with the traditional rulers. I'm not saying they are not doing that, but there is more that needs to be done.
Coming up after the break, Amnesty International has condemned the deadly attack on Dutsin Hajiya village, calling it one of the worst in a state plagued by violence for over a decade. At least 50 lives were lost. Families are still searching for their loved ones. Survivors are receiving treatment at Anka General Hospital, and yet government claims of security improvement tell a very different story. We'll break down what this mounting death toll means for the people of Zamfara and why accountability and action are more urgent than ever. Stay with us. Welcome back. So, Odiawa, let's continue from where we stopped. How might the continued abduction of women and children reshape the humanitarian crisis and long-term social stability in affected communities?
The humanitarian crisis will emerge as emergency, being born out of the insurgent crisis over time. We're talking about the abductions. Why is it always mostly the women and the children? Why? Because they are the most vulnerable. Now, talking about humanitarian crisis, typically in a home, the women are meant to nurture, take care of, and see how they can even mold. But a situation whereby even that woman in question is traumatized. She's emotionally restless at the same time. So these conflicting emotions begin to clash. She cannot even know how she can go about taking care of the child in question. And the child on his own part or her own part is now even radicalized. Oftentimes they're even pushed into forced or conscripted forcefully into the insurgent group or armed group that may be. And all these things come into play, waking up to gunfires in the night, shootouts, and blood all over the place. I was watching, now globally speaking, it's not restricted to Nigeria alone. In Kenya, we have Al-Shabaab. Then globally, we have ISIS. There was a particular killing back then, and I was watching it on TV, and there was blood splattered on a little child's face. And they asked the child, why are you not crying? All the child could say is, I'm used to it. So it was kind of emotional looking at it. So a child now that will now grow up with that emotional mindset, most of them will be traumatized. Those who are hardened will not be traumatized, but rather they will be stronger to see how they can be vengeful, all those kind of things. These are the humanitarian crises we need to face. I talked about not just emitting punishment. We also need to pass some level of emotional repair and see how we can, maybe, for instance, it's not okay to just bring bandits out of their shell and say you're granting them amnesty. What of the lives that were lost? What about a young child who saw his father being macheted or slaughtered? He grows with that mindset and sees his father's killer being granted amnesty and becomes vengeful. How do we doctor all those humanitarian crises? What rehabs are in place to make sure that the psyche of a growing child is not affected? So these are things you need to look at, because the minds of children are very, very delicate. And anything they see at that infancy stage or that adolescent age begins to grow in the subconscious. I was mingling with a northerner. Most of them, we know what they do. Either they are doing their local nishai, or they are doing their aluminium condemn, or maybe most popular, the bikes. Now, I saw one sitting idle, and I asked why, because he didn't see any job for the day. I was like, what's happening? said the country is sick and tired of the country, that he was thinking of going back to where he's from to indulge in banditry. And it falls in between the age brackets of, the adolescents or the teens or 20s. And it now falls back on addressing the dilapidated infrastructure that will now begin to infect or feast on the humanitarian crisis, which has to do with poverty. So if you don't bail these people out of their poverty mentality or emancipate them from their poverty, it becomes an issue. They begin to tilt towards the next available option. So what are the states actually doing in place? What is the Zamfara State government doing in place? What is the Kwara State doing in place, putting in place? Just because it doesn't just begin with a security of guns and bombs. Securing someone has to do with financial security, educational security, food security. So there's a whole lot to be done. So it goes beyond the guns and the bombs for protection.
All right. I think I just want to talk a little about what you said about a child seeing his father being killed and then, grows up to say that, oh, this same person that killed my father was granted amnesty. And then that made me remember a movie where a police officer was saying that he was asking his subordinates. There was one of their partner that works with them, like as a police officer, was someone that I think his father was killed while growing up. So the man was majorly the person who brought the boy into the paramilitary. And then one of their colleagues was asking, like, they think the guy is like interfering with the investigation and all that. And he said the reason why you ensure you get justice for anyone is so that you'll not bring up another criminal. Because if you do not get justice for them, they want that justice for themselves. And then you see them probably getting into criminal act again. That is why fair justice must be like put out there, like they must get their justice through the law. And like you said, if a child grows up to see that, oh, the father's killer now has amnesty, is now free, there's this thing that comes to mind, like, why are you working for? You ruined my life and I just want to do the same thing to you. And then just like that, and they used to say that the highest the hardest part of killing is you killing first. So once you do that once, you become like them. It's always difficult to become that person who is innocent and has a pure heart before. And that is why the government should at least, I know they're doing a lot of things that we might not see, but at least like what people can see, it's enough. We've heard news of banditry, kidnapping. It has become the normal thing. We're coming to normalize it, and Nigerians are getting used to hearing news like that. So once they see it, it's almost like, oh, it has happened again, and everybody moves on. So I think the government needs to do more in regards to that. Now, what forms of accountability and justice would meaningfully address the concern raised by Amnesty International regarding the rising death toll?
Regarding Amnesty International's demand or concerns, before I answer that, I think Nigeria needs to change from a narrative whereby, not necessarily Nigeria alone, when you mention some countries, you can know the characteristic traits associated with such countries. I used to hear from the octogenarians who are now in their 80s and those in their 90s. They say when you hear you're a Nigerian, the US and the UK would give you some level of respect. But that respect began to diminish. Why? Because of things like this. And why? The question marks, I would say those questions are unanswerable even up till now. Now, regarding Amnesty International, it still falls back to what I have just said. Nigeria has these characteristic traits. When they see you in Nigerian, first of all, it's a case of cybercrime. Now we've added another feather to our cap on a negative note, which is now banditry, kidnapping. We have abductions. We have election rigging.
So
corruption. So we hear all these things. Corruption doesn't end in government's coffers alone. It's also even in sports. You see most of our football players during the under 18 or the under 13 or whatever age may be. They come in there young, their age is falsified, but they cannot measure up with their counterparts who are still in the game. Our players are quick to retire. Now, coming back to Amnesty now. Amnesty they are vouching for sincerity. What they have to put out there is, or what they're actually advocating for is that if there are deterrent measures put in place, they should actually make sure that justice is seen to be served publicly. Like I mentioned initially in the first phase, that during the Buhari Diagbon dispensation,
Okay.
there were things like firing squad, which was strict deterrence, kick against indiscipline. So when you see that you're going against the law, some measures are put in place to make sure that those who are coming to engage in such will actually think of the consequences before the actions. But now they damn the consequences and go ahead with the action. And those who have engaged in the action, they are not properly even brought to book.
Okay.
Why? Because probably of their backings, like I mentioned earlier on. And judicial processes or personnel or commissions need to be put in place. And these commissions, upon being set up, should not be politicized. That's another thing. Because when it's being politicized, they cannot even stand their ground. Any of the board members who are the individuals who are in the panel who have some level of complacency should actually be removed or ejected and put people who are actually spotless, let me put it that way. And when they put all those people in place, they make sure that strict deterrent measures, like I've actually said, are meted out on these people. That is all Amnesty, I feel, should be calling for.
All right. Thank you very much, Adiawa. "50 lives, but numbers can be deceptive because 50 is not statistic. It is 50 fathers who will not return home, 50 mothers whose voices have gone silent, children who will grow up remembering the sound of gunfire instead of lullabies. And as families bury their dead in Zamfara, statements are issued in Abuja, condemnation, assurances, promises of investigation. So we must ask, is this a failure of intelligence, a failure of coordination, or a failure of political will? When villagers can predict an attack, when motorcycles carrying gunmen move freely, when warnings are ignored, then this is no longer just banditry, it is a systemic breakdown. Nigeria cannot normalize mass killing, it cannot normalize abduction, it cannot normalize fear as a way of life. Until then, every new attack will raise the same question: who is truly in control? This has been Viewpoint, where we discover perspective and embrace dialogue. I've been your host, Olaiton Babatunde, and with me in the studio has been Odiawa Hihai. Thank you for joining me in the studio.
You're welcome.
Alright. For more political content, subscribe to our channel at Veegil Media. Thank you for watching.